Hello, everyone. It is 12:12. I can wait like one more minute before we start. But just to introduce just the event, today you're attending UCI Alumni, Where Are They Now?, which is hosted by the Social Science Academic Resource Center. I'm gonna give it one more minute before we start. Yeah. So I'm gonna let people trickle in slowly. All right, I'm gonna get started and hopefully people will slowly trickle in. Before I start, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Elizabeth Hafen and I am one of your SARC peer consultants. I am a fourth year political science and psychology double major. I'm also joined by my fellow colleagues and SARC peer consultants, Nayeli Lopez and Emily Ramon. Nayeli.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Nayeli Lopez. I am a peer consultant here at SARC, currently a fourth year double major in education sciences and social policy and public service. I'll go ahead and pass it over to Emily.
Awesome. Thank you, Nayeli. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Ramon, a current fifth year, third year transfer student here at UCI, majoring in sociology with a minor in Chiclat studies. And I am also one of the peer consultants.
Can I get the next slide, please? Perfect. So today's agenda is as follows. First, we will introduce the panelist. After that, we will hold the panel discussion. Then we will open up the room for questions from the audience and close by 1 p.m. This is an hour-long panelist discussion. So if you have any questions, please submit them through the Zoom Q&A feature, which is located at the bottom of your screen. We will be addressing all questions at the end, and this event will be recorded. So without further ado, let's get started. Can I get the next slide, Carissa, please? Awesome. So for today's event, we have 3 guests who are all UCI social science alumni. We have Cassandra, Critty, and Ebony. Our first panelist is Cassandra CHEUNG, who is class of 2019. She graduated with a degree in business economics and was a transfer student from Santiago Canyon College. She is currently working at Learning Fuse as the program coordinator, where she specializes in reconstructing resumes and promoting student engagement within the tech industry. Her passion lies in higher education, post-secondary education, and tech industries. She was heavily involved in the social sciences with SARC, where she was with us for 2 years. She was also in PAA, DAC, FGHQ, and Student Life and Leadership with SPOP, Alternative Break, Thomas Sigma Transfer Honor Society, and research with the Division of Undergraduate Education. She's currently interested in learning how to implement UX design practices into higher education and post-secondary education, so she recently completed UX design course at Learning Fuse.
Oh, is this where I go in?
We'll introduce.
Okay, sorry. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next, we have Critty Rajput, who is class of 2011. She graduated with a BS in Earth and Environmental Science and a BA in Political Science, and is currently a senior corporate counsel at App Dynamics, which is part of Cisco. After completing her undergraduate degrees at UCI, she went on to pursue a JD MBA from Santa Clara University and completed her dual degree in 2016. Her undergrad degrees helped her develop the skills required to provide valuable legal support to both her non-technical teams she interacts with, like marketing and sales, as well as her technical teams such as engineering, product management, and IT. Her time working with the Center for Unconventional Security Affairs at UCI inspired her to pursue a specialization in intellectual property law and opened her eyes up to the option to take the patent bar. She has worked in a variety of legal teams across the Bay Area during and after law school, as an intern and subsequently as in-house counsel at various technology companies, including Zora, Oracle, CipherCloud, MLS Listings, Lending Club, Branch Metrics, and App Dynamics. She primarily practices in commercial, technology, transactions, product, and privacy counseling. She loves that she can work for companies that value both technological innovation and corporate social responsibility.
Awesome. All right. So I'll be introducing Ebony BREAUX, who is a class of 2013. Ebony received her BA in psychology and social behavior from UCI, where she discovered her passion for education. She has spent the last decade supporting students to and through college, focusing on those who will be the first in their family to pursue higher education. She began her work in college access as an undergraduate student, working with both high school and college students to help them prepare for their next steps. After graduating, she served as a Teach for America course member in the Bay Area before continuing her work in college access Beast. Most recently, she served as the founding director of college counseling in Los Angeles, where she helped to start a high school and create a college counseling program, leading 98% of her students to be accepted to a four-year university. Currently, Ebony is pursuing her master's degree in higher ed at Harvard's Graduate School of Education. All right, so now we're moving on to the Q&A portion. Thank you everyone for being here. And I'll go ahead and get us started with the first question, which we already talked about a little bit, but if y'all can just go more in depth with like maybe your involvement and how that maybe shaped you and your post-graduation plans. So the first question is, what were some activities you were involved in while at UCI? In any order is fine.
I can go first. So kind of like what was mentioned in my bio, I did a lot of things, but so my first interaction and activity at UCI was with SARC. So it was interesting. So I transferred, right? So I actually had previous involvement at Santiago King College, and Patrick was like, "Oh, are you interested in being an intern?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Okay, just show me your resume." And I'm like, "Excellent, I got that." So yeah, that honestly I did that for 2 years, the 2 years that I was at UCI, and that definitely was one of the main contributions to why I got my current position. Like it definitely has helped in terms of event planning, like workshops, presentations, and resumes, because I look at resumes a lot now. So that was definitely, I would say, because there was a super long list, but that was one of my main ones.
All right, I'm happy to go next. I was in school so long ago, it took me a little bit to kind of figure out what were my activities, because I don't remember a lot of them. And I'm not gonna lie, I think a lot of my activities didn't really help me in my career development or in my growth in my career, except for the exception being Model United Nations. I actually really enjoyed that and I signed up in my senior year, and I wish I had gotten more involved a little bit earlier on in college, because I felt like those relationships and those skills I developed were really instrumental in being successful in my first year of law school. I also thought the Center for Unconventional Security Affairs really kind of inspired me to think about sustainable design products and think about innovating to kind of help the world and help the planet. And that's how I got involved in tech. So they really kind of opened a lot of doors for me. Other groups I was involved in, Alpha Phi Omega, the community service fraternity, the Asian Pacific Student Association, which I actually have some lasting relationships from there that I do appreciate, the Indian Subcontinental Club, the Student Alumni Association, and the California Democracy Act Coalition. And I know I was involved in more, I just can't remember because it's been a while. But I wish, one thing I wish is that I had spent more time seeking out internship opportunities through the school. I was so focused on being involved in political campaigns and volunteer work that I never really thought of if that would translate into substantive work experience for me. And when I graduated, I really struggled to find a job where I could actually afford a living in the Bay Area where my family was. And that's why I ended up having to go to grad school. It was really that I couldn't find full-time employment at the salary that I needed to sustain myself.
All right, I can share now. So I do feel like a lot of my involvement at UCI was directly related to the career that I chose to pursue after. So when I first started at UCI, I was a public health major. I was like, what is it called? It was so long ago. I changed at orientation. I saw my 4-year plan and I was like, nope, not doing that. But I came in as public health. So I came in kind of like thinking I wanted to go into healthcare in some capacity. So my first year I did like some exploring with, I don't know, a public health association club and just like a few things like that. But during my second year, I started getting more interested in education. So I joined a club called WISE, which is WISE, stands for Women and Youth Supporting Each Other. And I stayed in that club for the rest of my 3 years at UCI. And so it's a mentorship club where women at UCI are paired with middle school girls, and I think when I was there, it was in Santa Ana, and we like provided sessions for them on anything from like future skills to healthy relationships to healthy eating, and we had mentees that we like journaled with. So that was really important because it started to let me realize like I really like mentoring students. I really like supporting students as they're kind of exploring their next paths. So I was in that. Ended up being the executive director my senior year, so became super involved with that organization. I also worked in housing, so I worked in Middle Earth, and so my second and third year, I worked like in a game room that's not even there anymore. I don't know what it's called, but where the new like high rises in Middle Earth. It used to be the Brandywine Student Center, and students could check out like stuff to play pool and basketballs and stuff like that. So I worked there. And then my last year, I lived in the dorms as a community assistant. So it's kind of like an assistant RA. And so I really liked that. And even though it was my job and I was getting paid for it, it like felt like an activity, because if you work in housing at UCI, it kind of like your world revolves around housing in a lot of ways. So I did that. I was also a peer academic advisor. So I worked in the School of Social Ecology, and I helped students choose majors, find classes, prepare for life after school. And then through social ecology, I had to do a field study internship. So I worked for EAOP, which is the Early Academic Outreach Program. So I worked in a high school in Anaheim, and I helped students like learn about the A through G requirements and make sure that they were on track and just help them think about their options. So pretty much everything I did was related to education. I guess sometimes looking back, I'm like, I don't know how I didn't realize that I wanted to be a counselor earlier, because like clearly everything that I did was somehow related to supporting students. But I guess no fun clubs, but they were fun to me. But that's pretty much how I spent my time at UCI.
And then actually, just to piggyback off of that, Ebony, because Diego asked a question, how did our experiences help us find our first position after graduation? So I was PAA for social sciences. Yeah, so what's interesting, so I think that like, it's definitely great to get involved. Just, getting that someone will take a chance on you, right? Whether it's research, whether it's, in a professional work environment. So I did SPOP too. So like in terms of directly related to my current job, so I did social sciences PAA, and so Jermaine, we had study abroad PAAs too. Peer mentors, and Jermaine, he was one of them, and he was super connected with LinkedIn, and he knew TJ, who is my current like colleague. So he and so because they were looking for program coordinator, which is my position, but it's kind of like they were looking kind of like a jack of all trades, like social media, admissions, right, event planning, and he was like, they did the normal like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Indeed searching for this position, and a lot of the the applicants weren't who they were looking for. And then so TJ was like, oh, Jermaine, do you know anyone who would be interested in this position? And so I graduated June 2019. And so Jermaine asked me in August, he was like, oh, are you still looking for a job? And I was like, yes, I'm interested. So network and connections. So I thought it was really neat that he kept me in mind, right, for that. And so I sent him my resume, and I actually met, essentially, I could do everything that they wanted on the job description, and I do a lot more now too. So my job description has evolved from that. But my involvement, especially with SARC, preparing for my resume, as well as the professional development interviews, right? That definitely really helped me, and also the workshops too, but especially my experience with alternative breaks, BOP, just being proving myself as a leader. Alternative break, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's part of campus orgs, right? And it's part of student life and leadership. And so essentially I was in charge of recruiting students to be in my group, and then also coordinate with the local campus or volunteer organizations in the site that I wanted to do. So I did Los Angeles. So I worked with them. And so I was essentially executing all of these. So kind of showing that level of independence, but essentially all of my jobs, like PAA, SARC, as a transfer too, that definitely has helped me with what my position is now. But I think that, yes, it does prepare you some level of expectation, especially work environment, and then also having that professional mindset. But I think another really important thing is that being open that you will learn the most in terms of the learning curve on the job, because yes, they can say you're going to do this, you're going to do that, but actually doing that, if you're able to gain that experience of learning on the job, that is going to help you a lot. I hope that answered the question. And if anyone else wants to pitch in too.
Sure, I can jump in too. I forgot to say I also studied abroad, which I guess is kind of an activity, but I'm happy to talk about that if people have questions. But I think, so right after college, I did Teach for America. And so like I said, I was clearly interested in education and knew that I wanted to work in education in some capacity, but wasn't quite sure how. And so I applied for TFA pretty early, I think even before the school year started. I think I applied in August, and then I knew in October that I was accepted, and I was placed in the Bay Area. So I think Teach for America is kind of interesting because I didn't have any direct teaching experience. I had, like I said, mentoring experience, and was really interested in education. But I think my experiences on campus definitely helped me get the offer from Teach for America, because it was super clear in my interviews and the work that I've done, and in the conversations that I had, that I was really interested in equity and access and education. And so I think that those helped give me the skills and the language that I needed to be able to be accepted into TFA. But then while I was there, I taught pre-K, and I really loved them, but nothing that I did on campus really prepared me to teach 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. I did fine and really loved it, but I wouldn't say my time at UCI directly impacted that. But what I will say is my first role after Teach for America, I worked for an Upward Bound program, there's one at UCI. It's a college access program. So you help students apply for college, learn about college, go on college trips, kind of all of that. And my roles at UCI completely helped with that, because on my resume, I was able to put, I have helped students learn about the A through G requirements. I've helped them complete college applications. And I did that through my field study work with the AOP. I was also able to put that I did one-on-one counseling in my peer academic advising role. And so not only did I learn the skills in those roles of how to have one-on-one conversations, how to talk to students about their futures, and the actual skill of this is what it means to apply to college in the state of California, which I also had from my growing up, but learning how to teach other students that, I learned that through my jobs at UCI, and I think that definitely helped me get my Upward Bound job after Teach for America.
So I love hearing these stories because I feel like people have pursued their dreams straight out of college, and I was not successful in doing that. So I appreciate hearing your stories, and it gives me so much hope for the future generations. So for me, when I graduated with an Earth and Environmental Science and Political Science degree. And what I was trying to do, because I didn't know salaries, I was the first person in my family to go to college here in America, and I didn't know what salaries were. So I came out and I started researching salaries after I graduated, which was a stupid thing to do. You should research that while you're in school and you're picking your majors. And I was getting like environmental research analyst potential opportunities, but the salary bands were so low that I couldn't afford rent in the Bay Area near where my parents were. And I was like, this is not going to work for me. So I tried like a bunch of different kinds of jobs. I got 3 internships at law firms, one criminal defense, one clean tech law partners, and one general practice. And they were all unpaid. So I was pretty much their like volunteer intern. And I got great exposure from it. It actually allowed me to build up my resume and go to law school. But one of the biggest things that I learned was I had invested so much time in activities in undergrad that I didn't understand how to translate that into work experience. Like Ebony and Cassandra have done a really great job of actually having substantive work experience from those activities. So when you have a resume, employers have unrealistic expectations. If half your resume is education and activities related to that education, they're going to be like, oh, they don't have work experience. This is not a candidate I want to invest in. But if your activities can go under your work experience section of your resume, it makes such a huge impact, because now instead of showing that, oh, they're just involved in 50 clubs and that doesn't translate into work experience, you have substantive experience that you're showing that you have going into a job, so they don't have to train you from the ground up. And that's really what's important to build, and I did not know that. So I'm glad that that is something that is now happening more often with like future generations of students coming out of social sciences.
Thank you for sharing. The next question was going to be, what did you do right after graduating from UCI? But I think that was answered. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, why or how did you choose your career path?
I can start. Okay, you know what's interesting? So I'm still figuring out my career path since I just like a recent grad, so within the past like 3 years. But so what's funny is like when my first job was at Santiago Canyon College, my community college, as an orientation leader, and then like got involved with the transfer center. So my first job and like basically the jobs before I've had this, my current one, has been within higher education, whether at a community college or at UCI. And so it's because that it made me realize that I love working with the student demographic. I think it's really interesting, like when you're a student, you're essentially trying to figure life out, and it can be very confusing. Like there's a lot like life, and it's like, oh, like does my major determine my work, right? My career. So I have always been an advocate of higher education. So actually, like after I graduated, I also did an internship with Irvine Valley College because I had this mindset of like, oh, I'm going to go to grad school for master's in higher education. That was my main mindset, because that's like, oh, all my experience have led up to this, right? Like I should be doing this. If I'm good at it, I should be doing it. And then I am currently working at my current job, and I did my the UX design bootcamp, and I'm like, oh, I actually really like design and like user experiences, user interface, especially in an increasing digital world. And, I work in the tech industry, right? I'm helping students get into the tech industry, especially coming from a non-technical background. So I'm actually gaining a more increased interest in having that combined tech and like kind of like ed tech kind of thing. But I'm not sure if ed tech is really what I'm trying to do. But right now I'm actually looking into like UX design, and ideal role would be like a director of educational partnerships, but at a tech company, so I could help students transition into, like, actually gain experience, whether it's at an internship at a tech company. So that's kind of like my main goal. But how can I get to that? That's what I'm figuring out right now. So I was actually, for a period of time, I was looking to instructional designer, because it does have to do with like UX, right? But I'm like, I talked to a couple of instructional designers and I'm like, okay, maybe I don't want to be like a pure instructional designer. So I really do like kind of being a jack of all trades and being involved with a bunch of other projects. So I'm still figuring that out, but that's kind of my current thing.
That is a hot topic, especially during COVID. Like, man, job opportunities should be great for you, particularly after the pandemic. So great choice. In terms of why I kind of went down the career path that I chose, I thought I was going to be an environmental lawyer. I thought I was going to save the planet. And I also thought I'm going to be CEO of my own company one day. I was very ambitious. I also was really silly in terms of how I went about doing my research. I talked to 2 lawyers, and that's how I determined I'm going to go to law school. And they both were, one was a partner in a big law firm, and another one was a general counsel in a big tech company. And they both made over $1 million. Like, okay, so you go be a lawyer, your starting salary is going to be like $500,000 because they're at $1 million. That's what's going to happen. I found out after my first year of law school, when I was already in the JD MBA program, I asked my boss when I was at Zoor, I was a baby intern, and I asked him, so what is my salary potential when I graduate? And he's like, what do you think it is, Krithi? And I said, I thought I would start at like $500,000. And he laughed. He walked up to my CEO and he's like, I need a raise because my intern thinks she's going to make $500,000 when she graduates from law school. I was mortified. I had no idea because I'd never like looked at salary surveys. I didn't even know that was a thing. So I highly recommend researching salary surveys for any jobs that you are interested in. I found out that it's maybe slightly above 100K, depending on what type of law you pursue. In technology law, it is slightly above 100K or maybe at 100K. That's what you start at, and you can work your way out, maybe end up at $500,000, 10, 20 years down the line. But no, you're not going to start at that amount. So that I didn't pursue it just for the money. I also pursued it for the desire to be in like a technologically innovative field in the Bay Area, like going to a law school here. It was really kind of advantageous for me because Santa Clara is uniquely positioned in the peninsula area. All the other Bay Area law schools are in San Francisco and above. So we kind of have a monopoly on the market for jobs and internships during the school year, and then summer for the Peninsula and South Bay jobs, because there's only Stanford, and Stanford lawyers go to big law or go to academia. So I was really lucky in that I ended up at a school. It's not like the most highest ranked school, but it's a school that has a geographic advantage. And I highly recommend looking into schools that have that unique location advantage in the area that you want to practice in. And also finding out what kind of field you're interested in, because environmental law was not for me. And I found out before I went to law school, thank God, but just barely, maybe like 2 months before law school, I realized I'm not going to be an environmental lawyer. So there were other options, thankfully.
Okay, so for mine, I've had a little bit of a pivot, which I don't think I've spoken about yet, so I'll talk about that. But as an undergrad, like I said, I didn't come in thinking I wanted to work in education at all. It didn't even cross my mind. I just I don't know, I had no idea that I even was interested in that. And then I'm a Black woman, and I got to UCI and I realized just like there's not a lot of other Black people there. And I started doing a lot of I was just wondering, why is that the case? And I started to do a lot of research in like California schools and demographics and where students are going to for public school and for college. And that's really what started my interest in education, because I grew up in the Inland Empire in Moreno Valley, and I went to public high school. And I just feel very fortunate that, I was pushed to take gifted classes and then AP and honors classes and really kind of put on this track to college. And I realized throughout my time at UCI that was the exception and not the rule. And so I was really invested in making sure that, it becomes more of the role and not like, I shouldn't be one of 2% of the Black students at UCI. Like, how can we do more work to increase those numbers at the UC as a whole? And so that's what started my interest in education. I was like, okay, I'm fortunate I was able to make it to this position, but I want to make sure that I can be a resource that I didn't have to students. So that's why I started mentoring. That's why I started doing advising and at UCI and at the high school. And so that's really what got me interested in education. In TFA, like I said, I knew I wanted to be in education, but wasn't quite sure if I wanted to be a teacher or a counselor, or really like, that's all I knew. There are so many roles in education, like so many, but I thought, well, I guess I'll be a teacher or a counselor. So I did TFA and found out I don't want to be a teacher. So I then switched to counseling. And I really enjoyed it for the time that I did it. So I did counseling for about 5 years between my Upward Bound program and the high school that I worked at in LA. And it was great. I was doing exactly what I wanted to do when I was at UCI. I wanted to work with students who were first gen like me and who maybe didn't know about all of the college options that they had, and work with parents who also may not have known about how to navigate the system. So I was doing that, really loved it, was having a great time. And I found myself at the end of my time at my last role, just getting a little burnt out. Like, honestly, I thought that I loved students, and at the end of that time, I was kind of like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to work with students anymore. I was working at a high school, and I hated disciplining students. I just hated it. I was like, you should know better. You're 18, or like, even if I get it, like disciplining, it's important. It's an important part of being at a school and being a leader at a school. And I was like on our school leadership team, but I just didn't like doing it. And so that to me was a message like, okay, maybe it's time to think about something else. And I did exactly what I wanted to do for those, 7 years after graduation. And I feel really grateful that I had that opportunity. But because I started to kind of like dread these conversations with students, I thought, okay, I think it's time for me to transition and to really think about what it is that I want to do and how I can still work towards this larger goal of increasing access to higher ed, but maybe not in the role that I was in at the time. So I went to graduate school, and I'm almost done right now. It's just I have to finish my final projects. So I went to graduate school. I knew that I was still interested in higher education and was trying to see, like I said, what other paths I could take. So I came to graduate school to study higher ed, and this year has been really great because I've learned so much about like the system of higher education in this country. And I came in kind of thinking, okay, the problem is access. We need to get more students into colleges. And throughout my time at this program, I've really kind of like opened my eyes to what other problems exist. And I think everyone finds their niche of like what they want to work in. And I just have been able to transition and think, okay, maybe we need to focus on career services. Like, I didn't know what careers were out there. Like, maybe that's a field that we need to focus in, or maybe we need to focus on graduate students and like making sure students know how to pursue graduate school. So either way, I was able to take a step back and really explore what's out there. And through this time, this is a long story, I'm almost done. Through this time, I learned about a different field, which is recruiting essentially for university leaders. And so I was slightly interested in recruiting in my last role because I helped to recruit teachers to work at our school. I went to job fairs and like helped with interviews, and it was super fun and I really liked it, but I didn't know, I was like, but I still really care about higher education. And through my time at school, I was able to connect with an alumni who also attended the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And she works for a company that, like, let's say UCI is looking for a dean for the School of Social Sciences. They might hire this company to help kind of run that process. So the company might look for candidates for the deans. So they might, look at other UCs or other community colleges, Cal States, whatever, look for people who might be a good dean for School of Social Sciences. They'll do phone screens, and then eventually they'll bring the candidates to UCI. If any of you have been on a search committee, they'll kind of support with that. So they'll make sure that they know what UCI is looking for, and they know what the candidate's looking for, and kind of match them essentially. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I start next week. So it's a bit of a pivot. Thank you. So I'm still working in higher education, and I've kind of shifted my interests to think, I kind of came into grad school thinking I wanted to increase diversity in college campuses and increase access. And now I've just taken a pivot and now I'm trying to increase diversity in leadership. So like if we can bring in more diverse leaders who, you know, can ultimately impact large change in a larger scale than I was able to do individually at my high school campus, then, you know, eventually, hopefully then that trickles down to then increasing diversity in students as well. So it's been interesting. I'm following kind of a different passion that's still related, but you know, I was able to take a step back and say, okay, if I'm feeling like annoyed with the students, it's time for me to go. And like, what else can I do to still work towards this larger goal? So long story, but that's what I chose to do and how, and then that's the pivot that I'm at right now.
You know, that's really interesting, Ebony, because like, you know, I don't know if you know, but like IVC just had their, like they had their search during, I think it was early this year or last year. And then so SEC, because the president of SEC moved to IVC, so SEC needs a new president. And so there's gonna be, they narrowed it down to 3 finalists. So it's always been intriguing to be like, oh, how did they, you know, narrow it down to these like very highly qualified people, right? So I always thought that was very interesting. But I'm excited for you. That's very exciting.
Thank you all so much for sharing. I do want to address the Q&As from students. And we have a question that says, I know that employers care about the skills and experiences, but I was wondering, how much do employers care about major?
I am happy to answer that one. As someone who has done a lot of hiring over the last decade, I would actually recommend that your major reflect what you are looking to do. There's a lot of people who can pivot, and yes, like if you take courses or take things to supplement your skills that allow you to pivot, great. And if you networking is key if you want to pivot, great. But if you did like an East Asian Studies major and you're trying to be like a Salesforce developer and your major doesn't line up and you're like in an applicant pool with hundreds of other people, some of whom have like a computer science degree or like some sort of technical degree, and you don't, yeah, you're going to be at the bottom of the pool, even if you have a referral, even if you did network. So your major, you need to be really thoughtful about that. For me, having an environmental science background means I qualify to take the patent bar exam. So I can be a patent lawyer, and patent lawyers and patent agents, they like do really well. It's pretty easy for them to find jobs. But because I had an environmental science degree, not a biosci degree, not a chemistry degree, not like a traditional science degree, I actually found it really difficult to find a job in a firm or as a patent agent because they didn't understand what sort of environmental science patents would I be filing applications for. It wasn't directly relevant, even though I spent so many years taking those chemistry, biology, physics courses that all the other majors took. I didn't have that requisite knowledge. So be really thoughtful about your major, really do your research in terms of what sorts of career opportunities are you looking into, because even 10, 20 years down the line, you look at my resume, you look at my major, and you stack it up against someone who maybe like did purely like computer science and political science and went to law school, got a JD MBA. Yeah, of course you're going to pick someone with that degree in a tech company like Cisco or App Dynamics than you would over my degree with environmental science. So it matters.
I do just want to add a caveat to that. It's still really like it's still possible to do a career switch even if you pursued a different degree, especially like, I mean, just because I work at a coding boot camp and we have most majority of our students come from non-technical backgrounds, whether it's from a different degree, non-STEM degree, or from they haven't accomplished a degree. Right. So I still think it's still possible, especially if you're able to prove to your employer that you have the drive and the willingness to learn. Right. Because if you're not willing, like, yes, you might have a CS degree or whatnot. But if you're not willing to learn, or if it no longer interests you, then it's like when they hire you and it's like, oh, why did you choose to do this in the first place? right? So I still think it's still possible. It's definitely still possible to still do a career switch if you don't have a related degree, but it's just how much work and effort are you willing to put into it? Because I know Google also had its own, just put out its certificates to be a data analyst, to be a UX design, right? So it's really the work and effort. Are you willing to do Coursera, right? Are you willing to take more classes if you are trying to do a career switch, right? To obtain that knowledge and education or even experience that they're looking for.
And then just from a different perspective, I honestly think that my major wasn't important at all. And when I was at UCI, education wasn't a major, it was a minor, but I didn't even think to minor in it. I changed my major a lot. So it was just not something that was in the cards for me. I was a women's studies minor, which I think is now women and gender studies or something like that. But I just really don't think my major was important. And I think part of it was because I did TFA and because I went to a school that didn't have an education major at the time. I was really able to pull my experiences of, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how people interact with each other and why, and kind of be able to shape that into why I was interested in teaching and counseling. And I think when you look back, it makes sense. Like in counseling, sure, we use some psychology concepts and, I can see where the overlap is, but I really think I could have taken this path regardless of the major that I chose. And so I think if it depends what path you're interested in. I also think in the recruiting role that I'm doing, there also is a lot of overlap with psychology. I think at the root of it, I like people and I like talking to people, and it makes sense that I was a behavioral psychology major. But yeah, I think for like hard skills, like if you are going to be like an engineer or like a lawyer or something like that, it is really important. Like if you can't be an accountant if you don't know how to do accounting, and if you didn't like learn how to do that as an undergrad. But I think that that's not the case for all careers. So I think it really depends, I guess is my answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I will go ahead and ask the next question, which is, how did you measure success as a student?
I can take this one again. For me, well, how my parents measured it was based on my grades. If my grades weren't up to par, I was not successful. How I measured it was how much was I actually retaining in my classes. So I remember actually my East Asian Studies classes were actually my favorite courses, and my sustainability classes were my favorite courses. And that really helped me determine that, okay, environmental science sustainability is the way to go. I actually switched from biosci to chemistry to environmental science. And then I realized I wanted to be a poli-sci major, but a little too late. But I was able to add it as a double major in my final year of undergrad. Don't ask me how I completed a whole major in 1 year. I don't really remember. I must have been very stressed out. It was a little crazy. But if you look at my science grades where I was getting like maybe a 3.0, and you look at my poli-sci grades where I got a 4.0 and I was Dean's honor list in every semester, like it was visible which courses I was more interested in and which really like I retained more information from. And I still remember a lot of the classes from Professor Uriu and Professor Matthews. So that's really how I measured my success. And I wish I have my notes from those classes because they were so interesting. I learned about like Korea-Japanese relations. So when I went to Korea for international business negotiation, through law school, I was actually more prepared than a lot of my peers because I understood the nuances of the dynamics between because we were negotiating against a Japanese team. I understood the nuances of that negotiation because I took Professor Yuri's class. So yeah, that's my answer.
Can you repeat the question? I had a thought in my head and I just don't remember what the question was.
Yeah, of course. So the question is, how did you measure success as a student?
Okay, got it. Thank you. So I guess like first acknowledging we cannot remove like ourselves from the system that like looks at grades. And so I think that it's just important to acknowledge that. And I think that I also, like Kriti, was really interested in, what classes am I most interested in? I always find myself coming back to women's studies classes or to psychology classes. And so I was like, okay, then that should be my major because that's clearly something I'm interested in. I recognize like the privilege that I come with and that I'm able to choose a major purely based on my interests when like that is not the case for everyone. Like sometimes you have to choose a major that's going to pay the bills and like that's something that's really top of mind. And so I acknowledge that like that was different for me when I was going through college, and maybe like looking back at something I should have considered a little bit, but I didn't. But I like acknowledge, yes, I did measure my success with my grades and my GPA, and like whether or not I want to do that, I think it's important. I like am in graduate school, and I think I don't know if I would have been able to go where I'm going if I didn't get good grades. And so I think it's important to like think about how you're doing in your classes and also what you're interested in. If you're like doing well in classes that you hate, that's probably not a good indicator of success either. And so I feel fortunate in that I was able to find a major that I loved and was able to do well in.
Awesome. And then for me, I would say it's your willingness, right? So your willingness to learn, your willingness to be open to opportunities, but also your willingness to ask for help when needed, right? So we've talked about that. We've talked with people in industry in terms of like the career or like the pathways we were interested in, right? So I think it's very important to talk to people in that sense, because it's much easier to find information from someone who's been in the industry or in the career that you would like to be, to even gauge if you're interested in pursuing it, right? Or to ask for salary expectations, right? Or even how to like negotiate salary. In terms of willingness to learn, especially when you like kind of like that learning curve, that was like the most amount of learning you're going to do in a new job is going to be on the job, right? And are you willing to learn and take up the challenge to everything that is presented to you? Obviously, you might need a little bit of help achieving some of those goals, but if you're willing to ask for that help, that is very important. So like for me, I also need to continue practice being more asking for help, especially in my work, because there's a lot that I need to do. Like there's a lot that needs to be done and that we would like to have done, and of course in terms of priorities, but it's also really nice to have someone be like, oh, how can I help you, right? And it might also I've seen it come off as like, because I'm always like I'm here to help you on your resume or any career job search or advice, right? And sometimes people or some of the students will be like, oh, I don't want to make it seem like as a form of weakness. And I'm like, no, I would like you to kind of change that kind of thinking, to really be like, how can I help you to pursue what your goals are? Remember, the very worst thing I can say is, no, I don't have time for you right now to help you. Or like if you get a rejection from a job, they're saying no to you. So the very worst thing that you can expect from people is they're going to say no. But on the caveat is, the very best thing I can say is, yes, I would love to help you. Like, I would like to help you in your jobs. I would like to help you, give you this chance in your career that you're trying to pursue. So it's really of that willingness to kind of be open to that kind of mindset and frame, like that kind of mindset, to be open to those opportunities of not like just work, but also talking to people as well.
Awesome.
Also, like, in terms of like UCI, like office hours, asking for help, right? It's even if you don't think you need help, it's still nice to talk to a professor, right? And it's like, it's kind of like, I've heard professors say like, oh, I just sit in my office hours all day, right? Waiting for people to come in. And especially with Zoom, it's like you're trying to wait for people to Zoom into your room, right?
Yes, thank you, Cassandra, for sharing that, and all the other panelists. I do have a follow-up question to what you just shared. I'm curious, or we're all curious to know that now, like as a professional, how has your measurement of success changed? And I know a few, like some of you went over this as well, but if anyone wants to add anything to that.
Very different. Happiness is my measurement of success. Happiness is hard to find, especially if you've been in a career for a long time and you're working really crazy hours. Being a lawyer isn't an easy 9-to-5 gig. It can be, like when it's not quarter end, it can be an easy 9-to-5 gig. Depending on what type of lawyer you are, you might be able to find that comfort. A lot of other lawyers I know, they're working 60 to 80 hours a week. Sometimes I'm working that much, but most of the time it's 40 to 50, so it's not too bad. Also, finding a job where I could get like really great benefits is more important to me than finding a job where I could actually make a ton of money. So that was like a really big career pivot that I did, because I had the opportunity to go be general counsel at a very young age, and I chose to not do that because right now my husband and I are in the process of adopting a baby. So we joined Cisco because there's adoption benefits, and there's so many other like amazing things that Cisco offers, like 4 weeks PTO. You get 1 week of volunteer work on top of that. So you pretty much get like 5 weeks off, and then on top of that you have the benefit of having a lot of support for new moms. You have great parental leave for both moms and dads. So those were the things. Oh, PTO is paid time off. Great point. So those were the things that were more important to me at this time in my life than some of the other like things that I was really passionate about 10 years ago. Like I knew I was gonna be a CEO 10 years from now. 10 years ago, that's what I was telling myself. I was gonna be like a really hard worker, even if it was crazy hours, I'd make those sacrifices. Now I'm okay not having that in my life. And I'm very happy in the state of being in the place that I am in my career.
Yeah, I definitely would love to kind of piggyback and just support that, like work-life balance, because I'm willing to put in all the hours, whatever it takes. But especially it's like, oh, what if I want to start this new hobby, right? How am I going to fit that time? And trying to, like right now, I've actually taken up hiking on Sundays, and it's been really nice to just like unplug, appreciate nature, just be like, know that I'm doing exercise for my body, but especially since like so many Zooms, right? It's like really hard to take those opportunities to unplug. And it can be very overwhelming, right? So that mental health my mental health is very definitely high priority, right? So that work-life balance. And yeah, I definitely agree with instead of like, yeah, money is money, but like benefits, being flexible, like, hey, I'm out sick, like I'm not feeling too well, like being able to have a work environment where people actually care about you and support you. It can be hard to find that kind of environment, but it's a really nice feeling if you are able to get to that.
I will say, I think this has pivoted for me lately. So in my last role, the school had a goal of 100% four-year college acceptance. And like there was data everywhere. This is how this class is doing. We're 20% of the way to our goal. Like it was plastered on the walls, on the website, on the Instagram. And I think that same culture is true in Teach for America. It was different for me because I taught pre-K, but it's very much like, what are the goals that you're setting, and like what's your students' progress towards those goals. And so for the past like 7 years or so, I've been really driven by that, and like that's how I determined my success. Like, and you even saw like in my bio, I put what percentage of my students like were accepted to 4 years, and like that was really important to me. And I think now that I've stepped back and I like have had some chance to reflect, and I feel differently. But at the time, like I will say, it was really important to me that like I'm hitting those metrics, and that my students are going to college, my students are doing well, my parents are coming to meetings. Like those numbers are really important to me, and I think that they still are. Like I think I'm trying to step back and think holistically. It's not just about 100% of your students getting accepted, but also like meeting students where they're at and making sure to support families whatever they need, even if a four-year university is not that. So I think I pivoted a little bit. I still think those numbers are important, but I think to what both of my other panelists have shared, or both of the other panelists have shared, that, you know, now I'm kind of like, I need some benefits. Like, I want some time off. I don't always want to lesson plan at night. Like, that's just not what I want to do with my life anymore. And like, as I'm getting a little bit older and, you know, just moving into a different phase of my life, different things I think are becoming important. But I don't think any one is better than the other. I think, you know, thank you. I think, you know, as you get older, your priorities start to shift. And I think this year off from working in graduate school has really allowed me to step back and think about, okay, this used to be important to me. It used to be important that like Y and Z was happening. And now what does it look like for me moving forward?
Thank you for sharing that. Now we're coming up to 1 in the afternoon. We're close to ending. So there's one question in the Q&A. I think it's for Ebony. Is, do you recommend Teach for America to those interested in academic counseling or other education careers?
Yeah, so I was just in the middle of typing it. So happy that I get to answer it live. I think Teach for America was a really great opportunity for me to see the education system firsthand. I think I was able to work in a school. I taught pre-K, but I worked at an elementary school. So I was able to really see what it's like to work in a school, because it looks different if you work at a nonprofit. Like you can still get a sense of education, but it's really different if you're working full-time in a school. You see what administration is like, you see how they prioritize things, you see students move through their time in school, and I really got a chance to see how early equity problems start, because my students were 3, and like I could see just like, you know, how early it starts. And so I think it was really important for me, because I think I knew I was really interested in equity in education and increasing access, but I don't think I truly knew how like deeply entrenched it was until I worked at the school. So I think if you're interested in that, and if you're interested in really learning about what it means to work in an education setting, I think working at a school can always help. Like, I think it's never going to hurt you to work at a school, because you'll kind of, you know, come out with a better understanding. I will say, if you know you don't like to teach, like if when I was talking about discipline, you know, you don't want to discipline, you probably shouldn't be a teacher, because it is very important. And maybe I knew that I didn't want to teach high school because I was 21 when I graduated, and like the kids were like looked like me, and I wasn't ready for that. So I knew I wanted to start with pre-K. So if in your head you're like, oh, you can make that decision. But if you know that you don't want to discipline, that you don't want to lesson plan any student at any age, I would say you should not teach. I think that there are other ways to get involved in education. If you're interested in counseling or something else, you know, shadow counselor, work for EAOP, like try PAA, like the things that I said I did. I think that you can do those things without being a teacher if you know you don't want to be a teacher. But I think if teaching is something you're even like remotely interested in, I think TFA is a good option. And then one caveat, like Teach for America, the mission is to increase access, and like you have to be okay and willing, and like you want to work in schools that have students that are historically underrepresented. Like that's not a piece of the puzzle that's negotiable. Like you have to be really passionate about that. And if you're not passionate about that, it's going to be a really, really hard year. Because I think in the times when it was hard, I was like, okay, but like this is connected to my larger mission to increase access. And like that's what I kept coming back to. But if you're just doing it as a way to teach and you don't necessarily like care as much about the increasing access part, I would say just go teach, like don't do TFA. But overall, it was really great.
Thank you for sharing that. I know we're at 1, but I just want to, before I close, last minute words or tip for students that are here. Like, is there something that you would like to share?
LinkedIn. I definitely can't understate the value of LinkedIn. If you don't have one, you need to make one. It's so important in every industry, particularly in tech. And it's kind of expected that you have it. Put your volunteer experience, you don't need to put your resume, but put content in there about like what work experience you have with bullet points of what you've achieved, so recruiters can find you. And recruiters will look for your LinkedIn profile. So when I'm interviewing candidates, before I even look at the resume, I'll look at the name and I'll look it up on LinkedIn and I'll try to figure out what information do they want publicly available. Doesn't match what's on their resume. Are their interests aligned? So you need to be really like good at LinkedIn, clean it up, and be prepared to network on LinkedIn a lot.
And who can help you? Carissa and the SARC team. But not just for LinkedIn, but, you know, resume, interviewing, right? So yeah, definitely. And another thing is like, you might run into questions. It's like, oh, what if, you know, what if they don't respond to me, right? Or like, what if I come off weird when I connect with people? Right. And I think another thing to also keep in mind is the world, like it's a very small world. Like I will find like sometimes people will find me, I'm like, oh, you're actually interested in doing this? Like, oh, that's really neat. Right. So actually, like, you know, friends and family are also really good to network with, and like especially with LinkedIn too. But it's a really small world. You'll definitely find that the like when you're looking for a job or like positions or even just people to talk to. And also that, especially at UCI, right? People are really willing to help you if you just ask them. Like I did SPOP and I applied for coordinator and I didn't get it, but one of the pro staff, they actually referred me to a different position for alternative break. And I was like, wow, that's super neat that you thought of me and that I would be a good, like, you know, candidate for that position, even though I'd never attended like an alternative break event, right? So it's really interesting, like, when you like your first impressions or just like maintaining those relationships, it can get you places like that. Yeah, it will definitely get you places for sure. It's a very small world.
Yeah, so just really quickly to really just reiterate what Cassandra and Preeti said, like LinkedIn and networking are super important. And I don't think I even realized it until my grad program right now, like the job that I'm about to start. I spoke with an alumni who does that job. I sent her my resume. She sent it to the hiring manager. The next day I was interviewing and like, I didn't even apply online. I just sent my resume and I was like, here it is, if you see anything. And so I think networking is just so important. Honestly, if like any of us said something that you're interested in that you want to chat more about, like email us on LinkedIn or message us on LinkedIn and say like, hey, I was really interested in what you said about like being a UX designer. I would love to chat more about your experience. Honestly, like those conversations have been really great for me to like help me learn other people's paths, but also just to build your network, because then if you tell someone that, they know you're looking for a role, when something opens, they might email you to let you know it opens. And that's just honestly like how the world works. And I don't think I thought it was like disingenuous, but now it's actually really fun. I love talking to people, and I'm like at the same time building this network of people who are excited to support me as I like move through the job search process.
Thank you for sharing. And I want to say thank you for the panelists for joining us today and the students that came. We hope that the students were able to take something away from the panelists. Again, the Social Science Academic Research Center is available to support anybody's professional endeavors. We provide feedback on resumes and cover letters. We also provide guidance and assistance during graduate school application process. I think Carissa sent in the chat how to make a consultation. I'm also going to put in the chat just the SARC website. So anyone that wants to explore it and see what we can offer, the link is in the chat. But I want to say thank you again for joining us today. And I hope that you guys have a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.